In this episode, I speak with the fascinating Dr. Oscar Serralach, founder of the Mother Care Project, functional doctor, postnatal specialist, and author of the Post Natal Depletion Cure. This book was endorsed by none other than Gwyneth Paltrow and Penelope Cruz. And what we dive into in this episode is really where we're going wrong in our conventional approaches to supporting new mothers. We'll discuss what postnatal depletion really is, how it's different to postnatal depression and anxiety. And I asked Oscar, are there any real benefits from consuming the placenta? And what's the deal with that? We dive into all of it, as well as tips to support an anxious, self-critical new mother. So if that's you or someone you know, do share this episode with them. Okay, let's go to the show. Welcome to the show, Dr. Oscar Serralach. I'm so happy to have you here and that you're sharing your time with us to talk to us about caring for mothers and how we can better do that. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation, Georgie, and I'm an admirer of your work, so I'm actually really happy to be on this podcast and let's talk about this very important topic of how to support mothers.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. So, okay, I think the best place to start this episode is just understanding more about your interest in helping mothers and where that started for you in feeling inspired to focus on supporting mothers in your work with functional medicine.
Yeah, well, that's kind of my origin story in some ways, and
we love an origin story.
Yeah, and to be honest, had you told me 15 years ago I'd be here, doing a podcast about mother care, I'd be like, you've got me mixed up with the wrong guy. I'm not opposed to those kind of things, but again, my story is one of necessity, not one of just interest. And I met my partner. Life was great. We wanted to start a family. We're working in a relatively remote area, and I was looking after the hospital in this small town, and I was getting an interest in functional medicine. So that's kind of medicine that's looking at lifestyle and sleep and nutrients. And I was also doing my studies to become a family doctor, so doing sort of GP training. So again, this is very typical of a lot of people about to start parenthood. They've got 5 projects on the go, and so just in that sort of overwhelmed, super busy, we can do it kind of space. And my wife wanted to have a home birth, and we lived in an area that was very open to home birth, and I wasn't so open to home birth because of my medical training. I was like, only those kind of people do home births, and we're not one of those, whatever those means exactly. And I was lucky that I had the other doctor who worked with me at the hospital. He was very straight, and he just said, look, I had 2 home births, Oscar, you'll be fine. And I was like, that's all I needed. Started doing some research about home birth being actually extremely safe if it's a low risk pregnancy. I felt a little bit duped because I probably was someone telling lots of people before then going home birth isn't safe because of medical indoctrination. But having really looked at the research, that's not so much the case for a low risk pregnancy. Had an amazing experience with our first in terms of a home birth and a great pregnancy and a bit of a wobbly postpartum. And just going, whoa, what is going on here in terms of sleep deprivation, this kind of heightened stress, prone to anxiety, overthinking, and observed. And we went ahead and had our second child. And then, looking at, I suddenly became interested in going, what's going on in this postpartum space? It seems really different to woman at any other time during their life. And I was noticing that there were some real patterns that I was learning in functional medicine that seemed to be happening in the postpartum in terms of hormones, in terms of nutrient loss, in terms of patterns of symptoms. And we had our third child, and life got really, really tough. We had 3 kids under 5. I'd already been researching a little bit about the postpartum period, and really had come up short from a medical point of view. There was just so little research about motherhood from a medical point of view. And as soon as a mother's 6 weeks postpartum, she's, from a physical point of view, she's back to being a woman and not a mother. And we know that things are forever changed physically.
Yeah.
And from an emotional point of view, as soon as you're 6 months postpartum, you're basically lumped in with general adults in terms of your mental and emotional health. And we also know that that's not the case with things like anxiety and depression, that there's can be a lag time, there can be a progression, not just something that happens straight away after the birth of a child. And so after realizing there wasn't a whole lot in the medical literature, I just started looking at traditional cultures, what they were doing, and started to dive deep into the what are called non-medical sciences. So sciences, this can be psychology, this can be neurosciences that aren't sort of medical necessarily, and just seeing that, oh my goodness, there is information out there. It just hasn't been either tested well in humans, or it hasn't reached the medical world. And so that's what I've spent the last 15 years really doing, is collating a lot of this information. Luckily, the research has really exploded in the last 5 years, and especially in terms of the maternal brain and the maternal hormonal system and her neuroresilience, or her ability to be able to cope with stress. Whereas when I wrote my book in 2018, this was just the beginning. There was some research out there, but there wasn't a lot. And so, I've been on a bit of a journey in terms of just necessity, and just in terms of helping my partner and friends and my clients that I was sort of seeing in my local GP clinic, and just realizing, okay, this is a pattern that just hasn't been well established yet in medicine.
Yeah. And you just saw a great need for it.
A great need. And I'm always been a curious person, and someone who has been accused of asking too many questions, at school, and, and I think that just has carried me through in terms of curiosity. And also it's been a huge liberation to understand, okay, this wasn't just us or my partner. This is a collective experience we're having in terms of struggle.
Yeah.
And if mothers aren't good, no one's good. This is just the law of the jungle in terms of families, communities. And I think the answer to almost any social or political question you might ask has helping mothers, supporting mothers somewhere in the answer. So whether it's climate change, whether it's, anxiety amongst the youth, whether it's this over fascination with economics that we have, and going away from humanistic sort of values in our society. I think mothers are a core part of helping course correct, if you like, in terms of where we're going as a society, because we all know we're up for a very challenging time in terms of climate, in terms of resources, in terms of population. And so I feel that my work is also helping the future. If I can help change the world one mother at a time, so to speak, because mothers are such a crucial part of teaching love to children. So they're the primary teachers of love to children, and emotional well-being, and they're the cement around the family unit. And I think that's a great place to start trying to fix, heal, and support, just in general. So
Making a positive impact on the world.
yeah, definitely. And it's become very enjoyable work. It's still work that gets me quite angry at times in terms of the socio-political aspect of things, and the fact that mothers aren't honored, really. I'll share something that I just sort of learned recently. This was about, why isn't it that we put breastfeeding or childcare at home onto the GDP, for example? Why isn't that part of our gross domestic product? And in the 1950s, they seriously talked about that being on the GDP. And they discussed it for a number of years, and obviously it didn't make it onto the GDP. But I think we would be having a very different discussion now. I mean, breastfeeding alone would add $3 billion to the Australian economy.
Wow.
And wow. and then all the unpaid carer work that mothers do at home. And there are fathers and other non-primary caregivers that are very much involved with that, but all that unpaid work, if that was put onto the GDP, that might change some discussions that we have about the healthcare system and where to support the well-being of society moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean, you're pointing to some really powerful topics there and sentiments, and I just wanted to say I'm thankful for your curiosity and, you know, being an ally in a space that typically and sometimes it can feel like it's only women that sort of really care about mothers or are really, you know, in that experience. And so it's wonderful to have your curiosity in exploring that and really helping our situation, because as you said, if we don't have mothers supported, the whole world is, you know, and humanity is not supported, and so many things go back to that. So really powerful. Thank you.
Well, I think everyone loses when mothers aren't well, and I've learned that the hard way. And we're all invested as well. So it's not like I'm a man interested in women's health issues. I'm a human interested in human issues.
Yeah. Yeah. And if only it was seen that way, like, as you said, on a government level as well, issues that affect women are affecting humanity, are affecting all of us, 100%. So, okay, I feel that's pretty clear what's inspired you to get into this, Oscar. So you also wrote a book, The Post Natal Depletion Cure, and Penelope Cruz and Gwyneth Paltrow endorsing it, obviously having such a powerful impact on women, and just reflecting, I would say, the need for it, the way that it resonates. What is it that you feel about that book that was like a key message that women really needed to hear, or the world needed to hear?
Well, I think it was just an unspoken truth about the fact that mothers aren't supported and aren't seen. I mean, that's and you know, I could have written that in less than 300 pages. But I think at its core, and then realizing this pattern of what can happen, this downward spiral that can happen when a mother isn't supported, and she starts to get into hypervigilance and sleep deprivation and nutrient depletion. It really is a downwards vortex that can kind of happen.
Yeah. And it almost seems like it's normal and it's just accepted that women after childbirth are going to be extremely depleted, exhausted, and just a shell of who they were before. Is this true?
Well, I think we're getting on some pretty slippery territory here. And what I mean by that is we normalize things that are common.
Yeah.
And that's a risky thing to do.
Yeah. Like period pain, for example, has always been so normalized.
Well, but also things like, you know, diabetes in the elderly is more common than it's not common. Is that diabetes normal? I don't think so. Cancer rates is, you know, up to 50% lifelong. So is cancer normal? You know, it's common, but it's, you know, you can't tell me diabetes or cancer is normal. And so I think having extreme fatigue and brain fog and emotional dysregulation in the postpartum, you know, it's very normal, but it's very common, but it's not normal in terms of if you're thinking of a healthy normal.
Yeah.
And so this is the world that we're slowly slipping into. You know, the rate of anxiety amongst teenagers is going up through the roof. You know, post perinatal mood disorders in Australia, possibly by the end of the year, might be between 1 in 5 to 1 in 3 mothers that are experiencing that. And it wasn't like that 10 years ago. So we're seeing increased rates of struggle, and it's not okay to say, "Oh, that's normal." No, you're just a tired, anxious mother whose hair is falling out, and your ability to do maths is terrible. Ha ha ha. No, and just kind of leave you to it. That's not okay, and it's not. It's a sign. I mean, it's a sign for me always that a mother is under supported in some ways and needs more support. Whether that be nutritionally, whether that be just with sleep advice, whether that be with supporting around parenting or childcare, I mean, and often in all of those things, and then much, much more sometimes.
Yeah, it's never just the one thing, is it? Like, here's some iron, off you go.
Yeah, I mean, iron can be a good start, but it's often a team effect in terms of getting mothers back to a more healthy normal, perhaps we could call it that.
Yeah. So on that note, what do you feel we're getting wrong in our conventional approaches to supporting mothers?
What are we getting wrong?
Yeah.
That could be a really long list. Maybe the shorter list would be what are we getting right? Well, a few things about that. One, we've said that we're not honouring mothers economically. I think that's huge. I think we don't also honour and support the postpartum in terms of whether it's 100 days or the 4th trimester or the first year postpartum. We don't have those concepts in our day-to-day language, where a lot of cultures do. And we have this backwards badge of honour almost about the supermum who can do it all. When are you going back to work?
Yeah.
and
Pressures for the body to bounce back as well. This whole body bounce back thing.
Yeah, which again is I don't know, boot camp for mothers. I mean, these things are actually very harmful in terms of ideals or concepts, rather than just honouring the process that you're becoming a mother now. And that's a fantastic thing. And there are lots of emotional, psychological, and body changes that you go through, and they all are positive most of the time. In a supported environment. And I think the other thing, I'm a bit outspoken on this point, is that we have masculinized motherhood in Australia.
Oh, say that again. Masculinized motherhood in Australia.
Yeah. And what I mean by that is the masculine principles have really come into play in something that is not useful. And the masculine principles are, if it doesn't work, try harder. And this idea of just keep on going solo and comparing yourself to others as your benchmark.
That competitive element, right?
That competitive element, rather than mending and befriending, which is much more of a feminine principle.
Yeah.
And this idea of the alpha, for example, that's a very masculine idea of who's in charge.
Right. Which is where mum might sort of be taking charge of the household because it's a sense of control and trying to feel like there is, it's not all falling to pieces, and feeling that sense that it's all on her shoulders to do so.
Yeah, and or also in her mother's groups or in her friend groups or in her, which is catching up with, her high school year or something like that. There's always those kind of elements, and I don't think traditionally women were like that. They were much more egalitarian, and everyone had an equal footing. And when you had groups of women coming together, and so that's what I mean about the masculinization, that we really expect mothers to mother like men, in that that idea that you should be able to do it all on your own. Just try harder if it doesn't work. Don't complain.
Have more discipline.
And just more discipline, push on through.
Yeah.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's a very masculine idea. It's not a very correct idea anyway. And this is what a lot of mothers are feeling, especially in that early first year postpartum, going, oh, it must be me. Or if only I just tried harder or was a better person, or maybe I'll just sleep less. I can do more hours of work, which is, again, not the solution.
Or it's my fault that I'm not sleeping enough.
Yeah, oh, yeah, that self-critical nature is very much embedded in this patriarchal society that we have.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a pretty, I suppose even just that is such a big part of what we're getting wrong, right?
Well, and it's not a great starting point in terms of foundation. So it's like, okay, if women are under-supported, then they're under-educated in terms of what's actually going on in the postpartum. And I'm definitely guilty as accused on that one, because when I started my parenting journey, I call it a Pinterest parent, which is like, I'm going to take a little bit of that and a little bit of this, and this is kind of the kind of parent that I'm going to be. We're gonna not do pacifiers, and we're going to co-sleep, but only for this period of time. It was just a quilt work of things that didn't actually have any experiential knowledge behind it. And then the reality of parenthood comes along that can sometimes be very brutal, and maybe you need to adjust your sleep policy or your feeding policies, or when things aren't working. And then where do you turn to? Because you haven't really investigated your options. You're not too sure who to reach out to, and everyone's very opinionated and very judging at times. And so at a time when a mother needs to be most supported ever in her life, and that's in the first year postpartum, can be the time where she feels the most isolated.
Yeah.
And that's a painful paradox in terms of where she's going to end up with that. Needing support, not having support, and feeling isolated. And then what do? I'll just try harder.
Is postnatal depletion different to postnatal depression or postnatal anxiety? Where's the sort of overlap there? Is there an overlap?
Well, no, they're very related, and they're related through a concept called neuroinflammation. The neuroinflammation just means inflammation in the brain, and that's not a bad thing. The process of pregnancy, there's a lot of neuroinflammation because the mother is upgrading her brain, and you need inflammation to grow and change, but it needs to be contained. And so a mother's brain goes through a massive overhaul in terms of new neurons being put in, old neurons taken out, new networks set up. It's quite outrageous how much roadworks goes on, and it explains a lot of the extreme fatigue and the nausea, vomiting that mothers may experience in the first trimester. The emotional lability is very much related to that, and the sensitivity of smells and taste. Just some of the things that come out of those brain changes. But her IQ goes up slightly. Her emotional quotient goes up a lot as a result of pregnancy. Her visual acuity even improves. Her social reasoning and facial recognition. It's interesting how the brain gets a lot of these improvements, getting a mother ready for motherhood. But like a newborn baby that is learning how to walk, just because you've got neurons to walk doesn't mean you know how to walk. You have to learn how to walk as a baby. A mother has to learn mothering once the baby arrives. And so that first year is a very vulnerable time. The placenta that makes all these hormones, that allows all the brain changes, is also birthed at the time of delivery. And so a mother goes into a very low hormonal state, in that typically for the first 6 weeks, with an idea that in a supported, quiet, baby bubble, sanctuary, nest, whatever you want to call it, those hormones come back online. Now, if those hormones don't come back online, that can lead to unhealthy neuroinflammation. So the brain becomes too electrical in certain parts. And all the issues that are known about postpartum fatigue, all the perinatal mood disorders, so anxiety, depression, OCD, on that spectrum. But they're just to do with severity of the neuroinflammation. And I came up with this term postnatal depletion to go, well, look, there are a whole bunch of women who don't quite tick depression or anxiety, but they've got neuroinflammation going on. So it's kind of, you can imagine that the depletion is a mild to moderate, whereas anxiety, depression, and OCD are more mild to severe in terms of neuroinflammation. And if you can imagine just a mother's brain in terms of the electrical patterns, and if there's too much electricity, parts of the brain get too hot, and if there's too little electricity, parts of the brain get too cold. If you can imagine hot and cold spots in the brain, the research that has been done in mothers, of which there's not much, shows unique patterns of hot and cold when a mother is anxious or depressed. And they're very different to an adult with anxiety and depression who isn't in the postpartum. So but we don't have that many words for anxiety. I mean, there's not like 20 flavors of anxiety. You either feel anxious or you don't. It's not like, oh, I think I've got poor sleep anxiety today, and tomorrow I'm going to have situational anxiety, and then the next day I'm actually having my postpartum anxiety. And no, the body just experiences anxiety as it's an experience. But it's quite brain-wise different in mothers in terms of what's going on in the brain. And so I came up with a term to go, look, there's a huge number of women who seem to be having neuroinflammation, but it's not in the severe range. But the principles of how to support those are still the same. The symptoms can be a little bit different, and there are some symptoms that don't occur in depletion that do occur with depression and anxiety typically. But many of the symptoms occur in both. And so for me, and this can occur in the years in postpartum, not just in the first 6 months. So to be diagnosed with postpartum anxiety or depression, you need to have symptoms essentially starting the first month postpartum and be diagnosed within the first 6 months. Now, the peak incidence of depression in the postpartum is 4 to 5 years after the birth of the child.
Wow.
But they can't call it that. They can't call it postpartum depression. They have to call it depression in the postpartum because it's outside the medical 6 months. Maybe we need to change the definitions because that would make a lot of sense, but we're not going to anytime soon. So the people who maybe should be aware of these things aren't seeing it because it's not part of their definitions in terms of the research. But a couple of the key symptoms and this occurs in depression, anxiety, and also in depletion, is fatigue. And fatigue is like not just, I have one good night's sleep, I'm okay. And overwhelm. And overwhelm is not just, I've got a little bit on my plate today. It's like, I've got 3 things, I'm juggling 3 things, I have to juggle a 4th thing, and everything falls apart.
Yeah.
And I can't even remember what the other 3 things were. I'm really struggling to. So overwhelm is it's a quite a severe symptom typically. And often mothers will experience hypervigilance, anxiety, and worry. But they may not be enough to be diagnosed of having anxiety.
Yeah, having an anxiety disorder.
Yeah, exactly. And often, mothers can be very noise and sound sensitive, and it's quite a unique maternal issue. They can also have a lot of hair loss, gum issues, so gum recession. Is a bit of a horrible saying in a lot of the Slavic and Germanic countries, and each of those countries has this saying that equates to something like 1 child, 1 tooth.
Oh, wow.
Which means the stress on the body takes a toll, takes a toll dentally. And that saying's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's interesting that that's something that we do see, whether it's receding gums, whether it's increased dental infections. And then occasionally we can really sort of see medical issues getting worse in the postpartum, or a mother developing food or smell sensitivity that she didn't have before.
Wow.
And
And
that
so,
just shows part of that whole inflammatory soup that she's in.
yeah. And yet there's this expectation of just get back on with life as normal as you used to.
Well, and I think there's a harm in that. I'm not sure if you are aware, or your listeners are aware, of this concept of matrescence, but I think it's a very useful term to talk about. And I'll just spend a minute or two talking about it, because I think it's super useful. Not because postpartum is basically after birth. That's what it means. Postnatal means after pregnancy. So they're both saying after an event. They're not talking about the transformative experience that a mother's going through. So matrescence came out of anthropology, but it's the describing of becoming a mother, and it rhymes with adolescence because it's meant, that's done at purpose. Adolescence is becoming an adult. There are a lot of brain changes, hormonal changes with becoming an adult. There's a change of identity. There's often a year or two of wobbliness for an adolescent as they're getting used to their adult brain. And you don't become an adult at your 18th birthday. It's just a significant time. And we hopefully don't criticize an 18-year-old for being a terrible adult if they don't know how to open a bank account and have a deep and meaningful political discussion, or whatever trappings of adulthood we assign.
Oscar, there are still moments I'm not sure I'm fully an adult.
No, but we nurture our inner child, really. And so, we're not an adult 100% of the time, because we're nurturing our inner child. And this is true for matrescence, that we're not 100% a mother all the time, but that's our primary neurobiological role. Yeah. And we shouldn't be criticizing mothers if they're struggling in the first year or two, because they're getting used to their matrescent brain. The brain changes and hormonal changes are way more for a mother than for an adolescent. And if you saw an adult trying to go back to being a child, you would probably pull them up and have a quiet word and say, look, get out of your school uniform, and just, that it's not. We tell mothers to go back to being their maiden self, whether it's physically, emotionally, behavior-wise, activities. Yes, a mother needs to nurture her inner maiden for sure, but you're not literally going to go back to being a maiden on any level. It doesn't make any sense. But to actually support that, rather than going, oh, you need to get back to your maiden body and your maiden way of doing things, because that's what the expectation is. So already we're putting mothers on the back foot in terms of supporting them, because we're not supporting them from a culture point of view.
Yeah.
With these false expectations. And then also just going, look, there's going to be a year or two of challenge. So that first year for me postpartum is critical. But we know adolescents come good eventually as adults, and we know that mothers come good given the right environment. And if we see a mother struggling in that first year or two, we should reflexively go out to help and support that mother.
Yeah. Not
judge her and leave her feeling like she's a bad person because she's struggling, which is kind of what we do as a society.
Yeah, 100%. And I do want to just touch on briefly, Oscar, you were mentioning the changes in the brain that can begin even in those first 6 weeks or that first trimester of pregnancy. I'm curious about how much we know around women who have been pregnant but maybe don't carry to full term, whether that is because they terminate the pregnancy or they miscarry. Are those changes in the brain something that remain? And where is this space for even supporting women post a miscarriage or post a pregnancy termination?
Well, that's a it's a big question. It's a really important question. In the first trimester, there are a lot of brain changes that occur. And if there is a termination or a miscarriage, it's almost like a start-stop situation where it's like you're halfway through a renovation in your house and we're like, oh no, we're not doing any more renovations. So there can be things that are halfway, if you like. So the possibility of experiencing withdrawal or a withdrawal type experience or anxiety or emotions, because suddenly the hormones are there, the brain changes are kind of, we just started, but things aren't continuing.
Yeah.
Some researchers are not actually looking at the number of pregnancies a mother has had. They're having a look at how many months you have been pregnant.
Oh, interesting.
Because the research is in terms of the brain changes and the long-term health benefits that a mother has, and potentially some of the long-term health problems that a mother has if she has a lot of issues during pregnancy, such as preeclampsia and gestational diabetes and hypertension and those kind of things. They actually go, well, the number of pregnancies isn't as accurate as if we look at the number of months pregnant. So I think it's only been a very recent thing. So I think that is helping support women in understanding, going, you have had more than your live birth pregnancies in some ways, if you've had miscarriages or a stillbirth or a termination.
Yeah.
But there isn't the support, the acknowledgement. There can be a lot of grief and emotions that come up that are quite challenging because we don't support it as a collective. Because typically if you see a psychologist, you're grieving the loss of that child because you wanted to become a mother, and the focus of therapy is really around that dynamic, which is obviously very important, but there can also be a lot of this physical stuff that's going on in terms of neuroinflammation. And then I also can bring up a lot of issues around what is it to be a woman in the 21st century, because I should be fertile, I'm a woman, I'm at the right age, and we're seeing infertility rates increasing. We're seeing miscarriage rates. They do vary a lot, but they're slowly on the rise as well. And yeah, so it brings up so many issues, and then not only just emotionally and psychologically. So, and for me, where I'm at, it's important that we're talking about these things. Even if we don't have the solutions or the experts, there aren't necessarily psychologists who specialize in supporting women if they've had a termination. I'm sure there's psychologists that are very good at doing that, but we're not quite there as a industry where you can go to the clinic that does these things. So,
and to your point earlier as well, saying, supporting mothers in all ways is so important for our society as a whole. Women who've experienced recurrent miscarriage and the trauma of that, or a termination earlier in their life, no doubt becoming pregnant later and becoming a mother later, should that be their journey, is something that's going to bring up whatever wasn't supported previously too. So the whole journey has to be supported. And I hope anyone listening feels at least somewhat validated, understanding that your brain did and your body started going through some very, very physiological changes that may still be with you.
Yeah, and the research shows that these changes seem to be permanent.
Yeah.
A mother goes through changes every pregnancy and every miscarriage. It's not like the first pregnancy you're done and dusted, no more changes. And thankfully, we only go through adolescence once. Can you imagine going through adolescence numerous times? I wouldn't be putting my hand up for that, just in terms of an experience. But a mother does neurobiologically go through matrescence with each pregnancy.
Yeah.
So it's just something to consider in terms of just because you're fine with your first or second pregnancy doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a smooth ride. Or if you have a very bumpy ride in a subsequent pregnancy, it's okay from a conceptual point of view, because it can happen and there's nothing necessarily bad going on. It just there's something that needs to be more supported than perhaps in the first pregnancies. Just a reframing can sometimes be useful.
Yeah, and understanding just how much and how significant that transition is when, so often in society, we've just got this woman, this image of like the career-driven woman who just pops off for maternity leave, has a baby, and back she is at work and everything's just the same. And I think there's some really valid things we need to consider in that. Now, shifting gears ever so slightly, Oscar, I've got a bit of a fun question for you. And that is, you may well be aware, I have no doubt you are, of the idea, but this is more for our listeners, the idea of consuming the placenta post-birth and the link that this can reduce symptoms of postnatal depletion. Where do you sit with that? Is it really a good idea? Are there real benefits from consuming the placenta?
Well, interestingly, this is probably the number one question that I get at my public talks. So I'm very comfortable and used to talking to this. It's called placentophagy, which is the eating of the placenta. Many animals do it, especially and often vegetarian animals. I'm not aware of any traditional culture that does that. I grew up in New Zealand. They do this in Maori culture, but I've talked to Maori elders, and it seems to be a more recent thing, not a traditional thing. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is this something that we've been doing for thousands of years? I don't think so, and I've certainly looked at a lot of literature, but we've always honored the placenta. So that is definitely something that's we've done for a very long time. There is research out there showing that if you eat the placenta, it's an amazing iron supplement. It has 15 times more iron per milligram than beef liver.
Wow.
So there is research, and that's pretty much where the research ends. Now, the placenta is going to be full of things other than iron. It's going to be full of other nutrients, fatty acids. It's going to be full of hormonal precursors and some hormones. And I have had literally hundreds of mothers say to me over the years, eating the placenta made a huge difference in how I felt, how I recovered. So you hear that enough times. I'm not a skeptic.
Yeah.
About eating the placenta. We didn't need to honor the placenta, and if eating it fits in with how you would honor it, by all means. In medicine, it has got a bad rap. Mainly because of poorly prepared placenta. And people literally just get food poisoning. And so in America, they've pretty much banned recommending this because of a woman who had a very bad outcome in 2018 because of a poorly prepared placenta. So that's the equivalent of getting food poisoning from something that you bought at the supermarket, and they try to ban that food. It's like, well, I don't think it's that food. It's something about the packaging processing that maybe needs to be looked at. So
yeah, like you go to a sushi restaurant, you get food poisoning, doesn't mean none of us can eat raw fish ever.
Yeah, exactly. Or we try to ban raw fish because someone got sick. So it's a similar kind of concept. But yeah, so the preparation is obviously important. And I wish there was more research that I could say, yeah, it's an amazing hormone support. But I will just share something with you just in terms of concept. Now, there is a placental hormone that the medical industry has tweaked into a synthetic drug. It's called allopregnanolone, and it's the first ever approved treatment for postpartum depression that came out in America 2019. It's not available in Australia, and it seems to switch off postpartum depression within a short amount of time, which again alludes to the fact that depression is different. This doesn't seem to work that well in men or maidens who have depression. So again, it's a unique treatment for a unique issue. and it's a placental hormone. Now, that said, if you take this as a tablet, that particular hormone, allopregnanolone, doesn't get into your bloodstream. That's why they have to give it as an infusion. So, so the theory that that hormone might help mental health in mothers, there may be other hormones in there or precursors, but it's an interesting idea that nature cures nature, and that they've used a placental hormone literally to switch off the neuroinflammation that is unique in mothers. Now, it's not available in Australia. It's extremely expensive medication in America, and I'm sure the Americans are just going to try to push it onto many mothers that probably don't need it, in terms of, they just have to need more support, more sleep. But it's, I think, just a proof of concept that mothers are unique, and also going, wow, this is, okay, maybe this is part of how the body tries to regulate things, which it is, because they've done studies in mothers with depression, and they've got low amounts of that particular hormone in the brain that seems to lead to neuroinflammation.
It's really fascinating. It certainly warrants more research in that area. I do find it a little irksome that in traditional cultures it hasn't been a thing, because that would give me personally a bit more confidence in the whole idea. Now, when we talk about there's IV placenta drips available in Bali, which I know it turns my stomach a little bit, because I can kind of maybe get my head around consuming something that's come from my own body. But the idea, I mean, I don't know where they're getting it from. Whose placenta is it? So that's, it's very strange.
Okay. Well, I'm imagining they're using the placental stem cells.
Yeah.
As opposed to, because if you took someone else's placenta, you would, it's like having a blood transfusion. The chance of you having a reaction are pretty high. So, but placental stem cells, you may not get that reaction so much. It is experimental. I know there are a lot of places, in Panama seems to be leading the world in this technology. I definitely think it's a medicine of the future, but I don't think it's polished enough yet to be recommending or even knowing what to expect with that.
It's okay, Oscar. I'm not going to IV drip myself with placenta anytime soon.
Yeah, but it's kind of a bit sci-fi. It's a bit intriguing, but a bit horrifying at the same time. So, but the idea of, and the placenta has the precursors to the precursors of the stem cells. So it makes sense that there is a fountain of youth potentially in these cells. The medicine of the future is definitely, you're going to be banking your own placental cells from your own birth and using them as medicine in the future. And there are places that you can actually bank them to do that. That makes a hell of a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Taking someone else's stem cells and hoping it's going to do a similar job and just doing a one-off, I have zero idea if that's even sensible.
Totally. And when we talk about consuming the placenta, for those who aren't aware, it's not typically like we just kind of keep it in a plastic container somewhere in the fridge and cut off a piece. Oh, my mind is even getting triggered by that image. But no, we're typically having it in capsules, right, that have been specially prepared.
Yeah. So it's usually dried and then put into capsules. That's the usual way, or it can be freeze dried and then put into a smoothie later on.
A smoothie of placenta. Wow.
Yeah, it's it seems to be more in the United States than here, but there are various ways. But the placental encapsulation is probably more than 90% of what I hear of being offered out there.
Yeah.
And that would seem to be the safest way of doing it. And then it's very much just like a company that's having beef liver capsules or adrenal liver capsules or these kind of things where the technology is pretty well researched in terms of how to do it in storage and those kind of things. So
it sounds like it's all been taken care of in that safety element. It's just getting over the mental idea that you're consuming a piece of your own organs, which is quite strange.
Well, no, it's actually not your own organs. It's the baby's organs. The placenta belongs to the baby.
So it's not considered a part of a pregnant woman's body, the placenta.
Well, it's definitely in a pregnant woman's body, but genetically it is the baby.
Okay.
Well, no, genetically it's actually the father's genes that are activated to make the placenta. Interestingly, and so yeah, but so for me it's you're not eating your own organ, you're eating an organ that you have created, but the baby has made.
So it's
Using the father's genes. So that really conceptually gets yeah, you can probably get a lot of mileage out of that in terms of where
that helps a little bit get the head around it.
Okay, I know it probably muddies the waters even more. So
yeah, I was gonna say I'm not sure it does help, but anyway, that's cool to know. Very interesting. So apart from consuming placenta, what are some things that we all need to be know about to manage and prevent, ideally, that pregnancy, that postnatal depletion and the anxiety that can come with that?
Yeah, so if I can get a mother during pregnancy and she'll come see me at the clinic, we do a lot of preparation around optimizing nutrients, making sure her iron's okay, that she's protein, fats, and magnesium, calcium, vitamin D. We do a lot of optimizing around those kind of things. And a lot of the multis that we're seeing for pregnancy are getting better in terms of helping the mum as well. And
so it all starts well before the birth time.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, even pre-fertility that we're starting, but most of us are not starting this journey pre-fertility. We're starting in the depths of postpartum or considering it during pregnancy. And so, optimizing during pregnancy, the importance of a good postpartum plan is essential. And it's a bit like we all prepare for the wedding and no one prepares for the marriage. We all prepare for the birth and no one prepares for the postpartum. There's a very similar parallel there. The average postpartum plan is, and I'm probably guilty as accused here as well, we're going to work it out as we go along. We're going to wing it. Now, with pregnancy, the birth, we really research that. The postpartum, yeah, we'll figure it out. And if you're lucky, you will figure it out. And if you're unlucky, you figure it out the hard way and have a lot of turbulence during that time, trying to work it out. So having a good postpartum plan, I think, is super useful. And this is really understanding some of that neurobiology, understanding the low hormones, the need for the baby bubble. And that it's not about bouncing back. I mean, it's a word we should just get rid of. It's about really just acknowledging the journey, the brain changes, the body changes, and the role changes, and then supporting that matrescence into motherhood. I mean, that would be a much better narrative to have around that. And to have a good postpartum plan, there are a few things that we say, and then we often do very detailed things as well in terms of what that looks like. But our mantra is deep rest 1 month, deep support 100 days, priority on sleep 1 year. And the one that always makes my mother's chins drop is the priority on sleep 1 year. And they're just like, what? I kind of get the 1 month, but the 100 days would be like, that's pretty far. And then I say to my couples, what does that look like in your life with your resources? Because we're all very different in that regard. Do we have family around? Do we have friends? Have we saved? No, I have some couples that have actually saved some money for the postpartum. A lot of couples, most couples, that's not something that they even know is a thing. And so within that, sometimes we have, okay, well, no gifts for the baby, only gifts for the mother. So that might be buying a month's worth of food or getting a massage once a week from a postpartum birth doula for 6 weeks or something like that. So we're really kind of changing that beam of focus of where the support should be. And then to sort of really support her coming back into her life in a different way. And we need to really talk to the partners and those primary caregivers that are supporting to enable them. I have a lot of fathers and primary caregivers who just feel like a bit like a fifth wheel and they're not too sure what to do. And so part of our postpartum planning is to help skill them up, resource them up so they're able to better do that. And it doesn't have to be elaborate. It just has to be just a bit more considered and going, okay, we're going on a bit of a journey here. So there's turbulence. Like if you're going on a big road trip, okay, I'm not just going to hop in the car and hope I get there.
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure we've got enough petrol and the tires are good, and we've packed some spare clothes, and we've got Google Maps with us. Google Maps would be a great idea. And so it's that kind of approach. You don't have to know every step of the way, but you need to have at least a plan of how you're going to negotiate that time. And so I think postpartum planning is a bit like that. And then the other thing that I really say to mothers is about know your nervous system. So, and that's a very easy one-liner to say, and it's not necessarily a very easy thing to start learning about, but I think it's super valid because the nervous system gets very much changed. The stress response system gets very much changed because of pregnancy and motherhood. And so if you can understand a little bit about how the body gets stressed and how the body relaxes, it would very much change how you then go about your day, your busy day as a mum, because every day is busy in mum life. And we have a few things to kind of help support that. And so one of them is around how long are you spending in relaxation every day? So how long are you spending in this? Researchers call it non-sleep deep rest. And so to do that, we need to do tiny things frequently, and a tiny thing might be 20 seconds. Small things every day, and that might be 20 minutes. Big things once a week, and that might be extending that time of relaxation to an hour or an hour and a half. Yeah. And then bigger things once in a while, which might just be once a year, but we're going into a retreat-like experience for 3 days or something like that in a state of non-sleep deep rest. The nervous system needs that. And if someone hasn't eaten all day, what do you say to them? Eat something.
Yeah.
If someone hasn't slept for 24 hours, you're going to say you need sleep. If someone hasn't rested outside of sleep, it's just, we don't have any concept around that. It's like, okay, you've been stressed all day. You need to relax. It would be a great support that we could give mothers. But to understand that, we need to understand how the nervous system works. And the nervous system is stress on, stress off, stress on. We need the off button. We need to keep dipping into relaxation. And then we can handle a lot more stress and not be so easily led into the world of chronic stress.
Yeah.
But to learn your own nervous system about what actually makes me relaxed, it's different for every person, it's different for every mother, but the work needs to be done. What are my 20-second things? What are my 20-minute things? What are my 1 hour things? What are my 3-day things?
Yeah.
And so...
Wonderful concept there, Oscar, and something I feel mothers and every human being could take in as well.
Well, anyone with a nervous system, essentially.
We all
and
need that.
Yeah, I mean, we've got dogs and cats at home, and I look at the dogs, and they'll get like super active, and then they'll just like resting, deeply resting, and not sleeping for extended periods of the day. Yeah. Now, I don't think we should be quite like that, but it would be nice to bring some of that into our. And we have cultures with siesta, and it's like, okay, that's. And even in those cultures where they do siesta, they're much more westernized now, and they're like, oh, they're not doing the siesta anymore.
Yeah.
They're bypassing it because of this go, go, go.
Push through. Yeah. I often find myself jealously looking at my animals when they're sleeping and just thinking, how do they do that? But they're a good reminder for us to relax and see how easily they switch off. And that sort of just almost imagining what would it be like to be that being just so blissfully unaware of any problems.
Well, but to allow yourself to relax.
Yeah.
And to surrender and feel safe enough. So sometimes mothers don't actually feel that safe because they're looking after children the whole time. They can't literally switch off.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely some challenges within that concept of relaxation. And my favorite thing out there for mothers, that minute for minute, dollar for dollar is the best thing that you can do, is a guided meditation called Yoga Nidra. Now, I'm not trying to sell Yoga Nidra. I'm just trying to sell the idea of relaxation. And the Yoga Nidra is just, again, yoga just means self-union. Nidra means sleep. So you're literally lying down and not allowed to move when you're doing Yoga Nidra. So it's not like there's even any movement. Listen to a guided voice who just takes you through different body awarenesses. And there is growing research about how useful that is to get into a state of non-sleep deep rest. And if anyone wants to follow the growing research, follow Andrew Huberman, who's kind of the neuroscientist from Stanford, who's taking the world by storm in terms of his research about physical training, about meditation, and he's a huge fan of Yoga Nidra. And purely because you don't have to leave the house. All you need is a pair of headphones. It's not going to cost you anything. You don't need to go anywhere and pay someone to do something. It's always nice to do that, but it's, and there are probably other things out there that could fit the bill, but that's certainly something I'm always encouraging. Could that be the small thing you're doing every day?
Yeah, we really
and then to
those techniques that can weave into our day-to-day so easily.
And to do that, maybe you need support from someone or a neighbor or your partner to literally, it might just be 20 minutes, but you need to be able to get into a state of deep rest. And then you'll get a good few hours after that. And that's much more stress on, stress off. And you're going to go back to your busy life. And so in some ways, I don't think it's so much about lessening stress. It's about increasing relaxation to meet the stress. I think that's probably a better way to frame it. Now, mum life is busy. It is stressful. There's lots going on, and we just need to just not leave the stress button on, because that's not good for anyone. It's terrible for mothers.
Yeah, we got to plug ourselves into the charger and expand our capacity. I would say if we keep going, we're just going to run out of capacity.
Yeah, and if your phone battery's on red, we're just like, I'm going to plug it in. I mean, you're not going to. I'm just going to hope it doesn't switch off.
Exactly, and then there's always that terrifying moment where it really does run out. And you're like, oh my god, I've got no phone.
Yeah, but a human nervous system just can't go black screen. It will go into overwhelm.
Yeah, which is not sustainable.
And zone out and dissociate or whatever. And that's on some level really not, it's quite harmful in terms of trying a mother's recovery.
Exactly, which is then going to impact our future generations as we, have not the capacity we need to raise our children, and all of the things and flow-on effects of that, tying us back to the start of our discussion. Oscar, I better let you go because we have reached our hour. But before we do, I would just love you to share how we can follow you and if there's any exciting stuff you've got going on at the moment.
Yes, and yes. So my main thing that I'm doing at the moment is called the Mother Care Project. And so you can just go to themothercareproject.com and just have a look what we're doing there. So we've just done our first cohort of 58 mothers, I think. We're taking through a 9-month journey of mothermorphosis, where we're just talking a lot about neurobiology, sociology, psychology, just everything involved with motherhood. And so there'll be plenty of things coming out from that. I'll be starting this is more for mother care professionals, but I'm starting a course about the science of motherhood, really targeting nurses in America, but there's going to be free content coming out of that, and then a textbook in the next few years and those kind of things. And so there's going to be lots of things for mothers, lots of things for mother care workers coming out of the Mother Care Project. And yeah, follow me on social media. I'm trying to post as much as I can on Instagram, even though sometimes I feel like I'm shaking hands with the devil or whatever the term is, because but we're trying to use social media for good, and I think that's, and so the research around social media is, you can use it for good, so it's not just all negative. And so that's how you can sort of follow this work. And I just really encourage mothers to have heart-to-heart discussions with other mothers, because the solution to this is not doctors learning all this stuff, and then it's about older mothers talking to younger mothers with deep support and non-judgment about the realities of motherhood, about the supports, and about this kind of framework as well. So we prevent depletion, anxiety, depression. We prevent fatigue. We prevent marriages breaking down because they're just overwhelmed rather than doomed to fail, which is not, I mean, some marriages are just doomed to fail, but many that I see are just overwhelmed and fractured just because of the weight of parenthood. And again, it's a situation where everyone loses. So it's those discussions I think are really important. And just to help mothers wherever we can. It's a fundamental part of a healing society, I think, and just of being a human, really, is helping those in need and not judging the suffering, I suppose. So
100%. 100%. Thank you so much, Oscar. And I really hope this episode is just one drop in that ocean of support that, hopefully becomes a tidal wave of change, just to bring that metaphor through. We will have links in the show notes to all of that information so that everyone listening can go and easily find you and your work and the Mother Care Project. Thank you so much once again, Oscar, for joining me.
Thank you, Georgie, and thank you for the work that you do too. I think Mothers Helping Mothers is, like I said, such a crucial part of this, and just bringing some fun, some lightheartedness, and some really deep support and real truths is so valuable. So I really admire your work too. So thank you.
100%. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, Georgie.
Thank you for listening. We have reached the end of this episode. If you enjoy this podcast and you find it helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would hit subscribe or share this episode on your Instagram stories, and make sure you tag @Georgie the Naturopath. But that is all for today. Please be kind to yourselves. Know that you are enough and you are exactly where you need to be.